Buon pomeriggio a tutte e tutti. Ancora una volta siamo qui per i nostri incontri di quest'anno sulla letteratura inglese. È il nostro portavoce, il professor Arturo Cattaneo, che adesso aspetto di veder comparire e saluto molto volentieri e molto cordialmente. Eccolo lì.
Buongiorno Laura, buongiorno a tutti.
Buongiorno Arturo, buongiorno. Credo che appunto ormai possiamo dire che molte delle persone che ci seguono sanno appunto dei nostri percorsi di formazione che ogni anno proponiamo e anche appunto siano a conoscenza di chi il professor Cattaneo è, però ci piace sempre pensare che ci siano persone che si aggiungono e che vengono ad ascoltare quello che abbiamo da dire. Allora mi piace ricordare che il professor Cattaneo è ordinario di letteratura inglese presso l'Università Cattolica e quindi questo nelle sue vesti di professore. Per noi da credo ormai più di 20 anni è la voce della letteratura inglese che proponiamo per la scuola secondaria di secondo grado, e la terza anima del professor Cattaneo è anche quella di una felice penna, e quindi appunto ricordiamo l'ultimo dei suoi lavori, che credo sia di un anno fa, se ben ricordo, Shakespeare in Hollywood, pubblicato con Einaudi, che è un bel libro del quale magari avrete voglia di andare a curiosare la trama e il senso e il significato. Siamo qui oggi perché le intenzioni dei nostri incontri di quest'anno guardano un pochino all'orientamento, alla didattica orientativa e a come, poiché è in realtà compito degli insegnanti di ogni disciplina toccarla o occuparsene, come questo tema possa diventare declinazione a partire dal lavoro che fate con la letteratura e con i vostri studenti. Quindi il titolo è I am not what I am, quindi parliamo di identità, Identity Crisis in Twelfth Night and She's the Man, The Comic Treatment. Il professor Cattaneo vi dirà poi appunto quale seconda faccia della medaglia è il senso del titolo di questo incontro. Vi trattengo ancora pochissimo e poi vi lascio all'incontro di oggi per darvi invece delle informazioni di carattere più di gestione, per ricordarvi che se avete piacere di formulare domande lo potete fare direttamente nella chat di YouTube, le raccogliamo e al termine del racconto del professor Cattaneo gliele rivolgiamo. L'attestato di partecipazione sarà disponibile nei prossimi giorni sul sito mondadorieducation.it. Dovete cercare la pagina attestati, dove troverete anche le slide che stiamo utilizzando per questa diretta. Per chi vedrà questo evento in differita, l'attestato sarà disponibile solo se si sarà fatto l'accesso dalla mail di conferma di iscrizione entro la mezzanotte di oggi, mentre la registrazione video resterà comunque disponibile sul nostro canale YouTube allo stesso indirizzo al quale lo state vedendo in questo momento. Vi lascio quindi al piacere della formazione e dell'informazione, le sue lezioni sono sempre molto illuminanti e con questo bel compito gli lascio la parola, quindi Arturo ti cedo il passo e ci rivediamo alla fine.
Thank you, Laura. Your introductions are always, very, very exhaustive and very generous, I might say. I would like to start, with slide number 2, with the title, in fact, I'm Not What I Am. This is a sort of sequel to what we saw last week, last Monday. I'm Not What I Am. These are words by Shakespeare, written by Shakespeare. And last week, we saw them in their context original, which is Othello, a tragedy. There was the tragic treatment. But today we're going to see them in Twelfth Night, and She's the Man, the comic treatment. So in a comedy by Shakespeare, and in the teen Shakespeare film, comic film, a comedy, which was taken from that. I realize now, and I apologize for that, because with hindsight in the title, now I would put identity crisis and gender discrimination in Twelfth Night, because that's quite obvious in She's the Man. Maybe not so in Twelfth Night. It's arguable. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But quite surely in She's the Man. But I hope that will be clear from what we are going to say now. I would like to start with the... What is it? Sorry, I'm trying to move my slides, but Oh, here we are. Right. I would like to start from the sentence, I'm not what I am, as we saw that last week, because I cannot assume that everyone was here last week. So I'm not what I am is pronounced by Iago at the beginning of Othello. And well, for Shakespeare audiences, for the Elizabethan context, that was quite clear. These words were a clear echo from the Bible. And in the mouth of Iago, there was a profane allusion to the way in which God defines himself to Moses in the Bible. God says to Moses, I am that I am. And of course, when Iago says, I am not what I am, that makes one think of the contrary of God, and that's a devil. And Iago looks like a devil, acts like a devil throughout the play. But today, we are less likely to catch the Bible allusion and the Bible context, and more likely to... And still I can't move my... There's something wrong here. I'm sorry. I don't seem to be able to move my slides. Can anyone help me? Oh, here we are. Fine. But for us today, a sentence like, or words like, I am not what I am, are more likely identified with identity crisis. And in psychology, and I repeat what we saw last week, for those who weren't there, and just as a reminder, very briefly, is a stage theory of identity development which occurs throughout our lives. Term was coined in 1968 by German psychologist Erik Erikson. But especially for us and for Erikson, identity crisis, which occurs throughout our lives, is associated with adolescence, with physical growth, sexual maturity, and integrating ideas about ourselves, what others think of adolescence or ourselves as adolescents. It's a task, it's a real task, that of resolving the crisis of one's ego identity. That's what we all go through during adolescence. And of course, that's what our students go through. So this is particularly interesting. But let's go back to Twelfth Night. I'm not what I am. Now, the very same words are used by Viola, the main character of Shakespeare Twelfth Night. The very same words used by Othello. And by the way, there's something strange here, because I've been looking at all the editions of Shakespeare, including the Oxford one, the Arden one, and no edition says that the words are the same used by Iago and Othello. A bit strange, really. But here, apparently, Viola says the words with reason. She uses the words to save her life after being shipwrecked in Illyria. After that, after the shipwreck, she's alone, she's no one, and she dresses up in man's clothes. She thus assumes an identity which is twice not her own, physically, obviously, because now she looks like a man, and psychologically, because she's not a man. Now, assuming another identity proves difficult for Viola, not just for practical reasons, but because she also falls in love with Duke Orsino, the other main character in the play. But being dressed up in men's clothes, she cannot reveal her true identity. But this is a comedy, and a happy ending is ingeniously contrived by Shakespeare. What is Twelfth Night, or What You Will? By the way, this is the only play by Shakespeare which has a double title. Twelfth Night on one hand, and What You Will. 12th Night is the Epiphany, so 12 nights after Christmas, and that makes for the Epiphany. And legend has it, or tradition has it, that it was Queen Elizabeth herself who commissioned the play to Shakespeare, said to Shakespeare, I want a comedy for 12th Night. Whether that's true or not, that remains one of Shakespeare's most popular and most brilliant comedies. Written around 1601, 1602, and as all comedies, all Shakespeare comedies, it consists of a main plot and a subplot. Now, the main plot is about complicated love stories between the nobles of the play. And the subplot is about jokes and funny tricks, very funny even today, played by the low-class characters among themselves. Now, we don't have the time, and it would be outside the scope of our talk today to deal with the subplot, but we are going to deal with the main plot. And the main plot centers on the twins Viola and Sebastian, who are separated in a shipwreck. Now, playing with twins is not unusual for Shakespeare, as we know. Possibly his first comedy, or one of the first, the Comedy of Errors, was based on twins, two brothers separated from birth. Here, the two brothers are separated in a shipwreck, and they are not two male twins, as in Comedy of Errors, but one's a woman, Viola, and the other one's a man, Sebastian. Now, Viola is alone, and she dresses up in man's clothes. Why? To protect herself, and goes to Duke Orsino's court to offer her services, Duke Orsino being the lord of the land. Viola now comes to court disguised as a page named Cesario, and, well, this being a comedy once more, she falls in love with Orsino. But, there's a big but, Orsino is in love with Countess Olivia, who does not return his love. And that's why Orsino asks Cesario, or Viola, to act as a go-between, taking his love messages to Olivia. Now, it so happens that upon meeting Cesario Viola, Countess Olivia falls in love with Viola, thinking she's a man. As we can read in the words here, Cesario, by the roses of the spring, by maidhood, honor, truth, and everything, I love thee so that maugre all thy pride, despite all thy pride, no wit, no reason can my passion hide. It's a passion that cannot be hidden. Now, the situation now is intricate but clear. Orsino loves Olivia. Olivia loves Cesario, who's really Viola. Cesario, who's really Viola, loves Orsino. And it's good to notice that here, the one who cannot speak out is Viola, because Orsino can declare his love. Olivia, can say she does not love Orsino and that she does love Cesario, but Viola cannot speak. So her identity crisis is clear. She pretends to be what she is not. And here comes the words which are in the title. Olivia says, "Tell me what thou thinkest of me." And Viola says, or Cesario replies, "That you do think you are not what you are. You don't know," she really means, "that you are in love with a woman, not with a man." And Olivia, "If I think so, I think the same of you. Then think you right. I am not what I am. I am not a man, as you think, and you're mistaken in you thinking me a man." So these are the very words. Confusing, isn't it? And it was even more so in Shakespeare theatre, because as we know, a boy or maid actor plays a woman's part, as it was customary then. So the woman on stage, we have a woman on stage who is really a man or a boy, plays being a man. And this is further complicated by the fact that the boy, girl, boy falls in love with a man. But how can he, she possibly declare his, her love? Mind you, this sounds very complicated here on paper and in talking. Of course, on stage and on screen, it is, well, easier to follow. And one thing must be said right now. Shakespeare immensely likes cross-gender or swapping gender in his plays. In his early plays, this allows female characters to roam at large without attracting too loose encounters of lascivious men, as Julia says in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, a previous play. Now, I would like to see with you that the loose encounters of lascivious men, both loose and lascivious, have an obvious sexual meaning. In other words, Julia is saying, I will disguise myself. She's traveling from Verona to Milan to follow her lover, who has deserted her. And in traveling alone, she knows that she might be what? Well, today we say well, sexually harassed or even raped. So women cannot travel alone. And Shakespeare makes that very clear. It is dangerous. Here, in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, as in A Midsummer Night's Dream, when women are alone, they are endangered. And that's why some of them dress up in men's clothes. And in As You Like It, Shakespeare goes even further, because there we have Rosalind dressed up as a man. And she calls herself Ganymede in order to escape to Ardennes. Then she meets Orlando, who is in love with Rosalind, but does not know how to court her. In fact, Orlando has met her before, but cannot recognize her, since she's disguised as a man. So she's in love with him too, but instead of revealing her true identity, she tells him she will feign to be Rosalind so that Orlando can practice his courting technique. How teasing and how dizzying, something to make us turn our head. A boy actor pretending to be a girl pretends to be a boy pretending to be a girl. Well, that's Shakespeare. If that rings a bell, if that sounds not so unusual, all these gender crossing is because it's been done a lot of time before, on stage and also on screen. This is a famous film, Tootsie, 1982, with Dustin Hoffman starring, in which we have an actor who's out of work. And he cannot work unless he pretends to be a woman. He gets the part and he becomes very famous worldwide. Then we have, a few years later, 1993, Mrs. Doubtfire, a huge success. Robin Williams, we can see him there, him or her, in the poster. And obviously, they're clearly dressed up in men's clothes, but they're in women's clothes, but they're clearly men. And of course, the main case for us is Shakespeare in Love, which is all based on a woman, Viola, again the name, who dresses up in men's clothes in order to be able to act, to play, to be an actor, which she could not in Shakespeare's days. And finally, we come to our teen Shakespeare film, She's the Man. This is one of the posters for the film. Notice the wording. We have, of course, these 5 teenagers or very young people at university or college. Duke, that's Duke Orsino, wants Olivia, who likes Sebastian, who is really Viola, whose brother is dating Monique. So she hates Olivia, who's with Duke, to make Sebastian jealous, who is really Viola, who's crushing on Duke. She is madly in love with Duke, who thinks she's a guy. Again, a bit confusing, but it becomes clearer and much funnier on screen. Now, She's the Man, 2006, is set in an American boarding school called Illyria Prep, preparation school. Notice that the word Illyria has been kept from Shakespeare's play. And in fact, unlike other teen Shakespeare, in She's the Man, we have an explicit reference to Twelfth Night in the opening credits as the inspiration for the film's subject matter. Now, as compared to Twelfth Night, so Shakespeare and this teen Shakespeare film, She's the Man not only keeps the identity crisis experienced by the modern Viola, but also greatly enhances it by adding gender discrimination, what I was talking about before. And what is it based on? Viola is an excellent soccer player or football player who is refused admission to the boys' soccer team because she's a woman. And to be admitted, she has to pass herself off as a boy. Of course, as in Shakespeare, the girl's identity crisis is complicated by her falling in love with Duke Orsino, the attractive soccer team captain. And by the way, Duke Orsino, in the front, we have Viola. On her left, which is our right, we have Duke Orsino. And then we have on Viola's left, which is our Viola's right, which is our left, the woman in the red skirt, that's Olivia. And then we have two minor characters. Now, She's the Man in the teen Shakespeare film, the triggering event of the plot remains the assumption of a male identity. Now, in Shakespeare play, the disguise is mainly a comic topos, a device, to set the story in motion. Why? Because Elizabethan audiences loved that, very much so. And as we've seen, the topic or the topos, or the device has been exploited many, many times by the cinema too. But by the way, doesn't Shakespeare use that also in another famous comedy, The Merchant of Venice, in which the very famous, the central part, well, it's the final part, really, almost, of the comedy is the trial, in which Shylock is tried in front of the Doge and the Senate of Venice. And the judge is a woman, Portia, a woman dressed up in men's clothes again. Shakespeare likes that immensely. The film, going back to She's the Man, centers on the love triangle between Olivia, Viola, and Duke, which is also the focus of the Bard's play. Now, how the two stories begin? Well, there are significant differences. We've pointed out and we've remarked many times, time and again, but let's say it again, because we say that to our students all the time. The most important points in stories, in any stories, be they a poem, a novel, a film, a play, or a speech for that matter, are lessons in classes, are how we begin and how we end. Rhetorically, these are the two most important points, beginnings and endings. Now, Twelfth Night begins with Duke Orsino complaining that Countess Olivia does not return his love. It's only in scene number 2 then we see Viola shipwrecked on the coast of Illyria, and that she decides to dress up in man's clothes. She's the Man begins differently. We see Viola Hastings as a teen girl who plays for the girls' soccer team at a high school, Cornwall Prep. However, the team gets cut. There's no more money, so the team is closed down in a way. Viola and her friends want to join the boys' team, but the coach refuses, and is very spiteful. His remarks are really male chauvinist remarks. And what's even worse, Viola's boyfriend supports the coach's decision. Viola asked her boyfriend for support, and what do you think? And he said, well, I think the coach has said everything. And he laughs with his friends at Viola wanted to be a good soccer player, as good as a man. At this point, Viola, who's upset, breaks out with him. So, at the beginning, the film's focus is on gender discrimination. That's the reason why Viola disguises herself as a man. And that was arguably not an issue, not so much in Shakespeare's time, but it is obviously today. And as we did for Othello last time and the teen Shakespeare film, which is taken from Othello, 1999, let's not undervalue the importance of the football team and sports competition, because as we remarked with Othello, with they're extremely, as we know, they're extremely important in American universities, colleges, and high schools. And that is sort of war, something very, very important. Now, the story goes on with Viola at this point taking up the identity of her twin brother, Sebastian. How? Well, Sebastian has to enroll in Illyria, an elite boarding school, but he goes instead to London secretly because he's a musician and he wants to play with his band there. It's at this time that Viola decides to pass herself off as Sebastian, hoping to join Illyria's boy team and beat Cornwall, to prove their coach and a cocky ex-boyfriend wrong for suggesting cancellation of the ladies' soccer team. What does she do? In Shakespeare, it's all very simple. We just see Viola suddenly turned or dressed up in men's clothes. Of course, it's much more difficult and tricky here because the film is much more realistic than the theater. And so here we have a stylist friend of Viola's, Paul, who little by little transforms Viola into Sebastian. And so she goes to the school. Now, it's quite important to notice now that Viola feels at the beginning discriminated against, socially by her coach and her boyfriend especially, and within a family, because her mother, who's a very old-fashioned mother, wants her to be a real woman, so to wear a long dress and to choose the right dress for the debutante ball, which is also quite important. Very briefly, we're going to see the setting, the characters, and the language in this Shakespeare transposition. Setting obviously is transformed because the beaches of Illyria become a typical American college. The scenes take place mainly in school settings, dormitory rooms, gymnasium, playground, locker rooms, science lab, and so on. But it's quite interesting to note that even though much of Shakespeare's play is being left out quite clearly, and things are different. This is a school, there was a court, the Renaissance court. Most of the names have been kept. For instance, Cesario, Viola here, is never called Sebastian. She's right, never called Cesario. She's right away Sebastian. But the name Cesario is kept in the restaurant, the name of the restaurant attended by the students, just as other names are kept. Characters. The original characters are recognizable first and foremost by their names, which echo quite clearly the original ones, or are the same, Orsino, Duke Orsino, but especially by the love dynamics between them. These have not been changed. And something of the emotional depth of Duke Orsino in Shakespeare has been kept, because Duke Orsino in the film is a sensitive boy who thinks that relationships should be more than just physical stuff. I'm quoting from the film. Mind you, he doesn't think that or doesn't say that a lot at the beginning. Why? Because at the beginning, he plays the role he's supposed to play, the macho boy. He is the one who goes out to conquer girls, to take them. But talking with Sebastian, and especially after meeting Viola, he changes his mind. So it's sort of growing up, which involves him as well. And of course, what is changed completely is the reality of interaction on the subject of love between teenagers. Here, love is less direct and somewhat awkward, and of course, more physical in a way. Language, as it is expected to be expected from a teen film, which places Shakespeare plots in American colleges and universities, the language is left out. What is kept, what remains is the story, the plot. But sometimes, as we saw with O last week, some words are kept or can be guessed beyond modern words. We have one notable exception here, and that's Duke's speech when Viola, near the end of the film, reveals her true identity. And Duke Orsino says to her, once she has had the courage to reveal her true identity, I'm a woman, he says, be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. One of Shakespeare's most beautiful and most famous sentences. And it's quite interesting, and I think quite telling, that it is placed here. We said a few words about the beginning. Now let's say a few words about the end. What is the plot resolution in Twelfth Night? So we go back to Shakespeare now. At the end of the play, Cesario, Viola, and Sebastian appear in the presence of both Olivia and Orsino. And quite clearly, there's wonder, confusion, there's physical similarity. They're just like two drops of water. How can two people be so alike? And the confusion is added by the fact that a couple of scenes before, Olivia and Sebastian have married. Sebastian, too, was saved from the shipwreck, had survived the shipwreck. And he goes towards Orsino's court. And he comes across Olivia. And Olivia thinks Sebastian thinks he's Cesario, quite clearly, because Cesario is so very much like Sebastian, identical. So she asks him once more to marry her, thinking he's Cesario. And this time, Cesario accepts because it's not Cesario, but Sebastian. And she's such a lovely, beautiful, and refined lady that he says, "Of course I will marry you." Now, knowing that, Orsino gets mad at Cesario Viola. "You have betrayed my trust. You have married the woman I was in love with." And it is at this point in Shakespeare that Viola reveals her identity. So the cases of mistaken identity are resolved. Orsino and Viola too can marry, not now, in the future, in the near future, obviously, as Orsino says to Viola, "But when in other habits you are seen, you will be Orsino's mistress and his fancy's queen, so no longer Cesario." What is the plot resolution in She's the Man? Well, maybe, I don't know whether you expect that, whether you've seen the film or not. If you haven't seen the film, whether you expected that or not, but the resolution of the film's conflicts takes place on the football pitch during the match between Cornwall, which stands for a Cornwall team, which stands for Viola's old word, and Illyria, which is Viola's new word. In neither, let it be noticed, in neither has she been accepted for what she really is, for different reasons, obviously. Now, during the match, however, she decides to reveal that she's a girl playing for the boys' team. It's quite funny, quite complicated. We don't have time to go into that. I leave you to the film for that. But she decides to reveal that she's a girl. And at that point, the boys from Cornwall and the coach of Cornwall want to stop the match. It's illegal. It's not in the book of rules. And Illyria's coach defiantly proclaims, "We are Illyria. We do not discriminate according to sex." And it tears up the book rules. So the match goes on with Viola, now a girl in appearance. She has taken off her wig, her male hair wig, and she lets her long hair hang down, and she scores the goal of the victory for her team. So the film's happy ending faithfully mirrors Shakespeare's comic solution, while also showing how Viola successfully comes to terms with her own identity. Is it that simple? Well, sorry. I don't know what's happened. Right, here we are. Not quite. But before we go into that, I would like to see with you this. Two plot resolutions are very different, aren't they? Because in the final scene of Twelfth Night, Viola, after confessing that she is not Cesario, is never seen in a woman's clothes. The play ends soon after, right after. But in She's the Man, the film goes on for another 20 minutes. And in those 20 minutes, Viola Hastings, once her womanhood has been revealed, no longer returns to the man's clothes or male clothes she has worn, and decides no longer to impersonate Sebastian because everything would just be a lot easier. What does she mean by that? It's easier if I'm a girl. And Duke himself, after feeling betrayed for a while, finally accepts Viola for what she is and accompanies her to the debutante ball. And that's the happy ending we were talking about, as in Twelfth Night. Completely different, obviously, but same happy ending. Now, the fact that in final minutes of She's the Man focus on the outcome of the search for identity, which is realized for Viola, confirms that this is the thematic heart of this Shakespeare adaptation. So the plot remains the same, roughly, but the thematic core is different. Now, just a few words before we go back to Shakespeare for our final remarks. Just a few words about Viola's search for identity in the film. At the beginning of the film, Viola knows very well who she is and what she wants. She's a girl and she wants to play soccer or football. That is, she wants to excel in a field which is considered masculine. But the coach of her football team and her boyfriend mock her for that. They're very strong on her, very mean, and prevent her from proving her excellence in football precisely because she's a girl. And Viola then feels she must prove that her perception of herself is correct, that she has to prove to herself, I'm a very good player. I can be as good as some men playing. To do so, she disguises herself as a man. And in doing so, in fact, she denies part of her identity, being a woman. She seems to be convinced that in order to claim to be as good as or better than a man, she must necessarily hide or repress her more feminine side. And that's something that she will only grow out of or outgrow at the end of the film. Because it is precisely the path of denying a part of herself, her female part, that makes Viola realize at the end that it is not satisfactory for her to achieve a made-up result. That is, to achieve a result being a man, and not being a man, obviously. Viola does not play the whole decisive game in the guise of a brother as a man, and decides instead to reveal her identity, as we've seen. Once she has accepted and verified the possible coexistence of the recognition of a value and a feminine side, so her value as a soccer player, but also her feminine side, she can fully embrace her true and complete identity. And that is why the film version of the play ends with a clear and positive resolution of the identity conflict. With some irony and lightness, we might say, the film invites one to accept all the components of oneself and not to hide any of them. It highlights how during the adolescent years, and here I'm quoting from an expert, the individual can only construct the self in the context of relationships with others, but at the same time must transcend the boundaries of these relationships and construct his own destiny. And what about Shakespeare? Now, in Twelfth Night, the theme of identity is obviously central and develops in relation to the figure of Viola, who until the last act presents herself as Cesario to all the characters she interacts with. She never reveals, to the very end, she never reveals who she is. So, with more reason, in fact, than Viola in the film, she can say, I'm not what I am, negatively affirming her true identity. But it's worth noticing that even under the false guise of Cesario, the woman always tries to be honest. She rejects Olivia, and with some ingenious stratagem, even manages to express her feelings to Orsino. It is only the moments of aside that the audience can know the real Viola, the woman who is hidden beneath the disguise. And this quote, the lines we are seeing now, reveal her uneasiness for not being able to reveal who she is. She complains about that situation, and she is sorry for Olivia. She loves me, sure, meaning Olivia. I am the man. If it be so as 'tis, poor lady, she were better love a dream. And notice this disguise, I see thou art a wickedness, wherein the pregnant enemy does much. So a disguise, her disguise, men's clothes, which was a way to save herself from danger, being alone and shipwrecked in a country she does not know, becomes now something, a sort of prison. And it's quite clear that Shakespeare does not word this in psychological terms, but it's inevitable for us today, after Freud, after Jung, after so much psychoanalysis and psychology, to see something in that disguise. You are a wickedness. She goes on to say, as a man, my state is desperate for my master's love. As I am a woman, now, alas, the day. What thriftless sighs shall poor Olivia breathe? In other words, Olivia will love me, go on loving me uselessly. O time, thou must untangle this, not I. It is too hard not for me to untie. And I would like to see these final words with you, these final lines. She says to us, the audience, it's an aside, what the other characters kind of know. She's too weak to solve that situation, to work that out. Time or the plot of the story shall untangle this. It is too hard not for me to untie. I don't know how to solve this. So will only be the typical comedy resolution that Sebastian coming along and the two being found out for being identical, that will solve the situation. And that tells us something quite important about women in Shakespeare's comedies. I think it might be true to say, or might be possible to say, that in his comedies, Shakespeare allows women a much wider range of action and of feelings than in tragedies. Because in tragedies, women are usually trapped in a situation which is much bigger. Women are usually trapped in a situation which is ruled by men. History plays. King Lear. Well, of course, they can do something, they can act. Think of Lady Macbeth, for instance, but their role is quite confined. They cannot be the protagonist, the main protagonist. Think of Romeo and Juliet. Romeo does everything. He goes about with his friends. He goes to the friar. He goes to Mantua. He kills people in a duel. Whereas Julia is all the time in her house, all the time, from the ball to the balcony scene, to the first night with Romeo, to her drinking the potion, to her dying. She never leaves the house. In comedies, women range. Women decides what to do. Women court men. Women dress up in men's clothes. That's quite significant, not only to escape danger, but also to take their destiny in their own hands. So I think that having a look at these comedies, can be quite useful for us when dealing with our students. I realize that it's much more difficult to present a comedy in class, but I don't think that we need to present the whole of the story, the whole of the comedy, but just the plot and a few excerpts, few quotations from the comedy. That are enough to show how women in Shakespeare's comedies have a much wider range of action. And I think that's one of the great lessons which are be taken from his comedies, from his plays in general. Well, this is all for the time being, and if there are any questions, I would very glad to answer them. Any doubts, any curiosities, but for me, that's okay for the time being, of course. This is a never-ending story, really. So thank you very much. Well, this silence tells me that Laura is not with us. Shall we, while away the time, before we have her with us again, with the last quote, which I left out actually because it would take us to another play, another comedy by Shakespeare, the one we mentioned before, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, in which we see Julia dressed up as Sebastian. Hi Laura.
Eccoci, scusa Arturo, ti lascio finire questa cosa perché poi nel mentre abbiamo raccolto un paio di domande. Finisci pure quello che stavi dicendo.
I gathered that. So maybe I was a bit too short. I don't know. But anyway, I'll finish this because this is another instance of a girl, Julia, dressed up as a man. And notice that in Two Gentlemen of Verona, she's dressed up in men's clothes and the name is Sebastian. So what's in the name once more? And she talks to Proteus, who's a former boyfriend, a former lover. And why? Because he has left Verona to go to Milan, and he has fallen in love with another girl, and he has given that girl a ring, and that ring had been given him by Julia. So, and here Proteus asks Julia, who's really Sebastian, or Sebastian, who's really Julia, to take this ring and give it to Sylvia, the new girl he's in love with. And he adds, she loved me well, delivered it to me. The one who gave it to me loved me well. And of course, that Julia, now dressed up as Sebastian. And Julia, but it seems you love not her, to leave her token. She's dead, belike, maybe. And Julia says, well, she did like you, obviously, because she gave you a ring. She did love you, but you don't seem to love her because you give away her ring. Is she dead? Which would be an explanation. Not so, says Proteus, the man, indifferent man. I think she lives. And Julia, alas. Proteus, why do you cry, alas? Julia, well, I cannot choose but pity her. Wherefore should thou pity her? Why should you pity her? This is what I was saying. Men are really thick-headed in Shakespeare comedies, maybe not just in comedies. Women are much more sensitive and much more intelligent. And Julia, as Sebastian says, because I think that she loved you as well as now you love Sylvia. She dreams on him that has forgotten love. So she, your former girl, who's really her, Julia, dreams on him that has forgotten love. You dote on her, you are mad on her, that cares not for your love. 'Tis pity love should be so contrary. And that's a perfect ending, I say, to any love comedy, or maybe to love in the word. 'Tis pity love should be so contrary. Unfortunately, not always, love goes the way we'd like to go, or things go the way we like them to go. Right. Is this the ending? Okay. Is this the end? Right, for me. Allora, thank you very much.
Ti chiederei, Arturo, di rispondere ad una domanda, sempre, intanto ti ringrazio, a proposito di gender e gender discrimination. Do you think that gender discrimination is really an issue in Shakespeare's plays? Was Shakespeare aware of that? Come la vedi? Cosa ne pensi?
Beh, dunque, penso che... allora, un po' ho già risposto, mi sembra, nella chiacchierata di oggi. Allora, in questi casi bisogna sempre dire di che cosa fosse conscio e aware Shakespeare è impossibile rispondere.
È impossibile dirlo, certo.
Però è un esercizio che ci facciamo inevitabilmente, perché when we talk to the past, or with the past, the past cannot talk back. So we talk to the past and we judge the past. We take the past for what we think of it. In other words, we inevitably see in the past what we think right, or what we are interested in. So gender discrimination is quite clearly what we are concerned with today, one way or another. We cannot say, actually, what Shakespeare the man thought of gender discrimination. We'll never know that. We know that in his age, of course, women had no power within the family, outside the family. Well, with the exception, of course, Queen Elizabeth being an outstanding case.
Powerful.
But it is quite clear also that in his comedies, especially, women often complain about the way they are treated, and not in a passive way. That's quite interesting. That's one of the reasons why they dress up in men's clothes sometimes, because they say, as a woman, I cannot go out and follow my lover or find out what's happened. But if I dress, so I dress up in men's clothes because that's the only way I can do it now. Now, meaning then, in Shakespeare's time. And let's never forget another thing, the famous proto-feminist speech of Emilia in Othello, in which she says, if we betray sometimes, it's because men betray in the first place. They treat us badly, they beat us, they don't give us money, they cheat on us, and so on and so on. Well, it's a long story, but it's a good question.
Possiamo sviluppare una serie di webinar sul tema, proprio diciamo una cosa, è un discorso a matriosca che potrebbe via via dettagliarsi sempre di più. Tra l'altro è molto buffo perché leggo appunto un'opinione di una delle persone che sta seguendo il webinar e dice: I think Shakespeare was an alien bard, always modern and intriguing. Ed è vero, è vero. Senti, l'Alien Bard. Un'ultima domanda, Arturo, che ha a che fare con lo Shakespeare tradotto o trasposto. Allora mi si chiede, lei ha parlato spesso di Shakespeare tradotto o trasposto al cinema e ha anche scritto un libro sull'argomento, che è quello che ricordavo all'inizio in realtà, appunto Shakespeare in Hollywood. Pensa che lo Shakespeare al cinema sia diverso, un'altra cosa rispetto allo Shakespeare a teatro? Ecco, 2 parole, un'opinione su questo, una linea di pensiero.
Ma io mi sono spesso scontrato in passato, adesso un po' meno, non so se i tempi siano cambiati o per qualche ragione, anche con i miei colleghi, che dicevano appunto che sostenevano che lo Shakespeare al cinema non è un vero Shakespeare. In realtà abbiamo molteplici Shakespeare, cioè abbiamo lo Shakespeare di carta, che è quello che vediamo, l'Oxford. Per esempio, ai miei tempi si studiava solo all'università solo lo Shakespeare di carta. Poi inevitabilmente e giustamente abbiamo avuto per secoli lo Shakespeare a teatro, lo abbiamo ancora oggi, ma era assolutamente inevitabile che nel momento in cui nascesse un nuovo medium narrativo, che è il cinema o la televisione, comunque l'immagine su schermo, le stesse storie fossero trasposte sullo schermo. È un destino che è tipico della narrazione in realtà, non solo di Shakespeare, di tutte le storie, se sono storie che ancora ci interessano abbastanza per essere riraccontate. Sì. Al limite anche della poesia, se vogliamo, la poesia che viene letta non più in presenza dal vivo, come è stato per millenni, ma sullo schermo. Insomma, è molto meno comune evidentemente, ma succede.
Colgo un'ultimissima suggestione e poi salutiamo. Appunto sempre una delle partecipanti appunto sottolinea o si pone questa domanda di ispirazione, dice: Shakespeare with the question of true identity is anticipating the absurdity of life?
Well, that's another good question because most of his plays, well, I'm thinking of tragedies especially, but even comedies, come to think of that, anticipate that. And it's not for nothing that Shakespeare's heroes have been called the first modern heroes. And once more, I'm thinking of Hamlet, but also Othello, for instance, because they are full of indecisions. They are full of doubts. And the absurdity of life is quite clear in Shakespeare's great tragedies. The most famous pronouncement being, of course, Macbeth's words at the end of, very often quoted, so we know them. But life as a tragedy, full of nothing, sound and fury, it's a chaos, full of nothing. It's sound and fury, confusing noise and fury, and life is a breathed candle, which is blown off unexpectedly, suddenly. So yeah, well, most of Shakespeare's theater anticipates that. Of course, again, never in Freudian terms, never in the terms of Samuel Beckett and the theater of the absurd, because simply he wrote some 400 years before that. But that's another instance that it also shows why we are still so much interested in Shakespeare, because it is possible for us today to say, as in the question, does he anticipate the absurdity of life? Yes, he does. Or at least we see that in him or in his plays, which is the same thing.
Prima di salutarci, Arturo, appunto, qualcuno mi chiede se posso scrivere l'esatto titolo del libro del professore. In questo momento ho disattivata la possibilità di scrivere in chat, ma lo dico e lo cito volentieri perché è Shakespeare in Hollywood ed è pubblicato dalla casa editrice Einaudi. Shakespeare in Hollywood, vedo se ricordo il sottotitolo bene, un viaggio lungo un secolo, tra cinema e teatro, mito, cultura popolare, Europa e America.
Molto giusto, e ci tengo a dire, mezzo minuto rubo ancora, che è stato scritto a 4 mani con un regista, per cui ha la doppia prospettiva, quello dell'uomo di spettacolo e dell'insegnante e di chi scrive. Ecco.
Io ringrazio tutti per essere stati con noi, ringrazio il professor Cattaneo, Arturo, ti ringrazio sempre perché appunto condividi degli sguardi e delle incursioni che credo possano essere molto di nutrimento anche se portati in classe, quindi tanti spunti, tante possibilità e tanti modi di mettere nelle condizioni di avere voglia di leggere o di scoprire anche piccoli pezzi, appunto, anche quando mi è interessato molto il fatto che tu parlassi del fatto che appunto se non c'è tempo, non c'è possibilità di lavorare sulle commedie, perché non provare comunque a rendere parte anche di piccoli pezzi significativi, eccetera. E quindi grazie di nuovo, alla prossima.
Grazie a te, grazie a voi, un saluto a tutte, a tutti.
E scusate per i piccoli imprevisti di tecnici. Buona serata. Grazie.
Buona serata. Ciao ciao.